Welcome to episode 11 of Bimcast. Today we have Angie Mendez from A-Lab Architects and Rune Vandli from Vixel, makers of Vrex. Vrex is a virtual reality solution for the construction industry integrated with Bimsync. A-Lab is thinking far ahead and works with Vixel to utilize VR as best they can. My name is Håvard Bell. And in this episode of Bimcast, we will dive into the fascinating potential of VR through A-Lab and Vixel. Angie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at A-Lab?
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I'm the technology specialist in A-Lab. We're an architectural company based in Oslo. And we have been trying to implement the latest technologies in the last 10 years. When I came to Norway, BIM was just starting. So we did the first pilot project in Barcode and started thinking open BIM and integrated the other disciplines within the design process. So it has been very exciting being part of it from the beginning. And now we see that 3D has done what it could, and we need to start adding new dimensions to the possibilities of what technology can do for architects and urban planners.
Cool, thank you. And Rune, please tell us what you do at Vixel and what Vrex is all about.
I'm the project manager at Vixel. My job is to figure out what the problems the users have and figure out what the software can do to help those problems. Vrex is a tool that we created to help projects to share information with stakeholders through use of virtual reality. What we do is that we combine data from multiple sources and present them in a virtual world that a project manager can bring their team and their stakeholders in through virtual reality goggles and collaborate and discuss problems.
Great. And so you guys have been working together now for almost 3 years. And could you share with us what is that collaboration all about and what you guys do together?
Well, we see that there is not a tool that gives you all the answers, and the disruption that technology is causing could go either way. So either you use it to your advantage or you drown in it. So we see as architects, we don't have necessarily the technical skills to create the customized tools that we need. So out of luck, I got in contact with Rune, and we have been collaborating to make sure that the virtual reality solution answers to what both designers and building owners need in order to reach as many people as possible and make it flexible enough that can still respond to the needs of the future, not only the needs of now.
So what's an example of how you are, what are the tools that he's creating that you guys are using?
Well, as you know, there's a really strong focus now on taking your share of responsibility for the environment, and we do a lot of traveling to communicate with projects that are in different parts of the country or clients that are even in different offices. We have bought an electrical bike though, but sometimes with the laptops and the drawings it's not good enough. So we see that just to have the possibility to create a virtual space where you can meet, that it's as close as it gets to reality, and you have the possibility to show your clients how something is going to look like before we even have finished the concept, so they can be part of the conversation, gets people very excited. And we don't want to just make all the decisions, we want to have as many smart ideas coming from as many possible points of view. So VR has become that common space.
Cool. And how do you kind of get this going with a client out there that doesn't have any VR goggles or doesn't know anything about technology, he's not interested in computer? How do you get him invited into the space, and how does that work?
Well, the reason why this has taken momentum now is that VR has now reached the point of accessibility that it needed to be. So the equipment is very affordable, and the tools are quite playful, very user-friendly. So even if you don't have a background in gaming, you will still be able to navigate yourself. It's the way how we experience the world in 3D anyways. So it's natural, it's a very organic way to experience an architectural project.
So you just call up your client or send an email saying, meet me here, or what do you do when you invite somebody on? Go here, buy the goggles, do that, and
Normally
do
we take them to the office first.
that? Okay.
So Rune can take them on a virtual tour first because he can move around the Vrex as if he wasn't home. So it's very nice that he can take them through the experience first before you get familiar with the tools, because the possibilities are many, but just to get familiar, it's important that it's a smooth experience for the first time. So it's funny, like the clients keep like trying to go in places and falling down to the basement. So Rune has to go and pick them up again and bring them to where the issues we were discussing were. But all in all, we only have got very positive experiences.
So what are the benefits that you see from this?
Well, for example, we did a demo with one of our clients where they were very interested in testing the different concepts from the interior designers. So it was a completely eye-opening experience to be able to compare how the working environment would be, how the light would affect the space, depending on how the layout was decided. And in a plan drawing, everything looks great. But when you start walking around and getting a feeling and comparing the options, he had like one of these aha moments. So we understood that this was probably a very easy way to engage the developers within the design process as early as possible.
It's a very cool story. So Rune, you obviously lucked out when you met Angie here and got an exciting client to really work with you to do these things. But what's your experience so far with working with AELAB?
So we are depending. We need to figure out what VR can solve today, but we realize that VR is still in its early days. So we need to have also a big focus on what we can solve in the future. And AELAB is not afraid of thinking about what's going to happen in 5 and 10 years. So we work a lot with them to test out new prototypes and see what can the benefits be further down the road. And that's been very beneficial to have a partner like that.
What's the sort of the biggest help do you think you've gotten from AELAB?
I think the ability to be able to imagine a world, let's say 5 to 10 years ago, down the road, when mixed reality is everyday part of a work environment. That's not easy to imagine, I think, in its full spectrum. So be able to spend a lot of time with someone and get into that mindset, that's really helpful.
And at AELAB, how do you sort of set up resources to engage with Vixel and spend time and discuss, and how do you sort of fund this work? Do you have your own sort of funding part or budget, or is it pro bono, or how does that work for between you guys?
Well, we always invest in research because we like to be a little bit tech savvy. We want to make sure that that we have an edge to the work we do, and you cannot be left behind. You know, in my experience, technology always develops in waves. It has to be a certain order how things happen. So first, in a regional market, we have to reach a maturity of BIM understanding, open standards, everybody up and running, before we could think of having interdisciplinary models in VR. So now that we have achieved the BIM level that is necessary, we can start getting more ambitious. So, for example, for us now, we see that VR has been a very isolated experience in the past. That's why maybe it wasn't as attractive. But now that Rune has managed to create a social experience within VR, that's a game changer. And we see that sometimes maybe just being immersed in the digital world is not enough. You also want to have the context. So the fluidity between VR and AR is where the target is for us now. We have started discussing it already, but it's probably going to be a very exciting road to try to see the tools are there. The development of VR has come so far that we need to start conquering this other territory, because mixed reality is going to be what pushes things in a completely new direction.
I remember talking to one of our clients in France, a construction company, and they were looking into VR. They bought there some tools, and they tried to look into stuff, and they found that in France they have a checkers that are independent of the contractor and the owners and stuff like that, but they come in and they check the work of the construction company to make sure that everything is done, and it's supposed to be a neutral part, and it's a part of the mandatory stuff. They are very used to working on 2D drawings, so they're very sort of used to that, and our partner wanted to get them involved in our tool, Bimsync, which is a web-based collaboration platform where you can view the 3D model and stuff like that. But they found it really difficult to navigate in the 3D world on a 2D surface. So they put on goggles on them, and then immediately it was like a natural, because they can walk around and they can do things. But what they were missing was to capture the things they found inside the virtual world. So here's a beam that's misplaced, this is wrong, this is good, this is not good, and to communicate that back out to the project so that they can fix things. And I think this is what you guys have done in the integration with Bimsync, where you have you're allowing your users to capture issues, capture problems, take pictures, and send them back out to the rest of the team. And I think that's also a very valuable part of VR comes in, where you can sort of capture stuff you find inside the virtual world and bring it out to the rest of the project that's not participating at the same moment. Mm. Is that something you have used a little bit about, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that VR has been traditionally a visualization tool. And so you filter out extremely valuable information that comes from the BIM model when you do that. So why would you strip your data from its value? So that was what's interesting about Vixel, that we started looking at how can we create a process where the information is maintained through the entire cycle. So for example, if you try to do interdisciplinary coordination, as we always do, you're sitting on the screen, I have the mouse, I'm trying to navigate, and the consultants are telling me, well, a little bit more to the left, no, I meant the other angle, and you know, it's impossible for me to answer to 10 people simultaneously. So when you are all together inside the virtual reality model, you just look and point. It's natural, it's just very organic. So all the time that you will use on communication issues disappear. And then you're just using the most human, natural language to talk to each other. And you have the possibility to record all these changes and then bring them back to the working models that you use to develop the drawings. So it's really about maintaining the data and enriching it and bringing people that normally is not part of the software production into the equation.
So in your experience, Rune, what was your thinking when you implemented this from your point of view?
You mean the BCF integration?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, BCF, BIM collaboration format, is a way to capture issues and problems and images and which objects are related to that issue, problem, or challenge.
Yeah. So at first we started working with showing all the data inside virtual reality, but the first reactions was that we need to save all the data that we generate while we're in here. So it started all started with taking meeting minutes and notes, and then developed into full open BCF format. Because as soon as if you go into the virtual reality and you just get a passive experience, that's one thing that may change you, but the ability to change things on the outside, that's where the value is. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, and I really like that, and I think it's what you were talking about as well, Angie, to be able to capture what you are seeing and what you're doing and bring it out so that you can improve on the design or change the design and improve the interdisciplinary sort of connection, if you will.
And think about it this way. Iterations in architecture are very difficult because you cannot build and then see how it looks and then demolish and then build again, right? You have only one chance, which means that basically every project is a prototype. So it's hard to learn from each project. But if we use VR, you can really simulate the user experience and make better decisions. And when we do interdisciplinary coordination using the BIM models with the consultants before they go to the building site, it means a lot of savings for the client as well. You're literally doing virtual inspections before you do the physical inspections, and the cost is 0.1% or God knows. But it's really meaningful for the client that we, as designers, can offer the benefits of the tools. You just have to open up the discussion, and then it is so much fun that people jumps into it at once.
That's exciting, and I think there's a huge potential that's not being tapped yet. But if you can capture as much of the challenges in one project and somehow organize it and keep it for easy access in the next project, you should be able to go into any kind of new virtual design building, and you see a challenge, and you should be able to have a list of related challenges that you've experienced in earlier projects based on, I don't know, artificial intelligence or some kind of algorithms that picks them up for you, and then you can quickly resolve this issue because you have done it before, in a sense. I think that if you start tracking data, start tracking the information that you are solving, the problems you're solving, that becomes a really good source for the next project to learn and improve and make things better.
We have been thinking about that a lot as well, because one of our goals is to bring more and more context into each issue. When you're going to make a decision, you need as much context as possible, and eventually that will be a huge amount of data from all the different, everything from point clouds to terrain to cities to buildings to interior things. Then that's information overload. So what we're looking at is analyzing the data from project to project, and then only selecting out those visual elements that we predict is interesting for this the different issues that we're going to discuss.
That's very interesting. So, there's also this concept of ICE meeting, integrated concurrent engineering meetings, where everybody meets in the same room. You have this knowledge of a big room, that you have big screens, and everybody comes up and discusses things and whatever. I think VR or collaborative VR, where you can meet inside VR, can replace this in many ways. Is that something you experience in A-Lab?
Absolutely. And think about it this way. We have a lot of focus on the construction part of it, but the cost of the building is only 10% of the total budget. So we have to start thinking life cycle. For the people that owns and manages the building, these VR opportunities could translate into them managing their portfolio in a completely new way. Say that one building owner has 10 buildings around the city, they don't physically need to go and visit each one of them, but we can use the data for them to access their property from wherever they are. So for the next phase, we feel that it's not good enough to just hand over the keys as architects and move on into the next project. We really want to read the information of how the building is actually used and help the client to optimize along the way. And by gathering all this information and comparing it, probably with help of some sort of logarithm, we can start creating the next generation of buildings on an exponential learning curve from our own design decisions, instead of just hoping for the best and every time started from scratch.
I totally agree, and that's a very exciting potential for the whole construction industry. If you start implementing that all over the world, the savings are unimaginable. The potential is huge for innovation on that. And I think in order to make that happen, and that's where we're kind of working quite hard, we're spending a lot of our time on developing the international standards needed for the information to flow freely between these things. So for example, for Vixel to avoid having to implement support for a proprietary standard in this tool and in that tool and in that tool and in that tool, there should be open standards for all the information that you can, and then if you have that, if the information flows kind of freely, you can have companies like Catenda or Vixel or other companies creating add-on value and solutions in the middle of the data flow. and then the exponential curve becomes even more exciting in a sense. So that's why I'm excited about open standards for this.
And the building owner already owns the data. They just don't know what to do with it.
Exactly.
And as long as we don't reach that point where there's a common language, a neutral software language that we can all relate to, we can then offer them the opportunity to actually own this data and develop it and maintain it and make it an asset.
Yes, and that's why I totally agree, and I think it's very important to think about the life cycle, as you mentioned. You have to understand, okay, there are some data generated here, and that data can be used further down, maybe during demolition, during maintenance, during construction, I don't know, but it can be used. And you were mentioning a little bit earlier in our pre-talk, Rune, that you wanted to sort of expand the value of the model that's being created. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
As the demands for a more detailed and more time spent on creating the BIM, I think it's important that we expand on what the BIM is used for, to expand the return you get from spending all the time on creating the BIM. And that to be able to do that, it's like you said, it's important that someone has using open standards and open APIs, so that service developers can develop services on top of that BIM model. We talked about instances that, for instance, doing fire drills in a BIM to avoid having to close down shopping malls or hospitals or critical buildings. That's a huge cost for the building owner once it's up and running.
That's true. So if we can, for each step, and I think the building owners need to get on the stage here, I think, in a sense, and start thinking about what they need and what they can have for better managing their assets, so that the data itself becomes an asset as well. I've heard Statsbygg in Norway talking about instead of having sort of a maintenance crew for this building and a maintenance crew for that building, they can have one maintenance crew for 10 buildings with one sort of dashboard where all the sensors are bringing in data, and they have the visualization of what's going on, and maybe they have some VR usage to go in and see what's needed to be done and so forth, but that they have all that much more readily available and can manage much more assets in a much more efficient way using less resources.
So far we have had focus on static data coming from the BIM models, because this is where the requirement lays at the moment. So every contractor in town is delivering full, coordinated, interdisciplinary BIM models, and that's a good start. But that's where we're friends. Like, we know that we are going now through the fourth revolution. You know, technologically, we had first steam, then electricity, then robotics, and now it's a really complex network of different kind of technologies that all together become really powerful. It's almost like being a superhero for an architect, to suddenly have the possibility to go and X-ray your virtual buildings and, you know, interact with your disciplines in a completely different way. So we see that bringing into dynamic data, in addition to the static data, is going to have the potential to really recreate the future in a different way. We have to start changing some behavior patterns, and we need to get people engaged in a way that only personal experience can do. We need to make sure that the population, that the authorities, that all the people that is making the decisions, not only the developers, the people with the money, are part of the process and believe in it. So if we want to make radical changes, we have to offer them an experience that is as valid as reality, if we really want to make things different.
That's very true.
So VR is going to be that possibility, and that's why we also think that we should integrate augmented reality in order to combine real conditions, because that's very difficult to simulate in the digital environment. So we need to start bringing the projects into the site before we discuss heights, which is, as you know, like a big issue in Norway. So to show the value, we need to be way more sophisticated than we have been so far.
I agree, and I'm a little bit curious to what, because you initially talked about you are thinking about what the usage should be in 5 to 10 years. So, and you're building some prototypes or you're testing things. Could you share with us exactly an example of exactly what you're doing? What does a prototype mean? What do you do then? Do you buy some wires at the hardware store and connect stuff, or what do you do?
Well, to take a little bit easier, a shorter term thing that we're trying to work on is, it's like I mentioned, using VR as a natural part of the an extension of the ICE activity that is becoming more and more popular amongst the companies. One of the goals for performing an ICE session is to reduce the delay from an issue arises to get a solution for the issue, and catching it before it happens. Those sessions are good, but they do have some challenges in that they are time-consuming and costly to execute well, and they are depending on the team being semi-local, and you bring everyone into the same rooms. So what we're in the short term looking at is to make VR a natural, try and get VR to keep some of the ICE benefits without having to be locally in the same space. Then the testing there is made, doesn't have to involve any virus. It has to do with testing out different processes, because all the software and all the parts are there, but we don't really know at what step and how do you coordinate things using this new tool. So I think it's more a people problem than actually a hardware problem. We don't have to use any duct tape for this testing.
Nice.
But the reason why it's not a problem anymore is because, don't be modest, we have come so far on the technology itself. It's so smooth that technology is only successful when you don't notice it anymore. So once you manage to make disappear the lagging, the dizziness, the unfamiliarity of being in VR, then we can talk about innovation coming from people. But in order to get there, he needs to answer on the specifics, but it is really high requirement for making VR feel smooth and comfortable. I mean, I have been testing this for 10 years, and in the beginning it was like after 5 minutes you couldn't handle it anymore. And I think there's still some stigma around it from people that doesn't know how far the software development has come. But in my experience with Vixel, is as smooth as it gets, as close to reality as it gets. What is it that you advise for Rune for time using VR before you need a break?
I think the more you use it, the more you can handle it. It's like being on a boat. The first time you might get a little bit seasick, but over time you get used to it. But I don't think there's any need for having long sessions in VR. We have to get to the point where an engineer is having a problem, just like he would be in an ICE session, and he knows exactly who to contact, and it will take a few minutes for that person to meet inside virtual reality and resolve the issue. If you are able to get to that point, then a lot of possibilities opens up with decentralized teams and working with companies spread across the country and the world. And a lot of some of the companies that we've been working on are at that point already. We have a client in oil and gas that creates subsea constructions, and they have virtual reality goggles on each engineer's desk as a fourth screen, so that and they coordinate the 3D models across 8 different countries. So when there is a question about how to do this, you can just contact someone in the other country, and they meet in VR in a few minutes and resolve the issue. Then you get maybe you don't get 100% of the ICE benefits, but you get, let's say, 70%. That's a good step.
Can I say one thing? In our last brainstorm, we were imagining this hypothetical scenario where you will have the building owner in a meeting with his board and inside the virtual reality environment. And then we also will be the architects in our office with the program, like moving things around and showing the design. And at the same time, there was someone on the construction site with the AR goggles now, projecting on the site what everybody else was seeing on their computers. So we can imagine this kind of all-round integration, regardless of your background, regardless of your discipline, that you can just participate and everybody's looking at the same. So that will bring all the teams together. That's what we almost think about it as a democratization process, where you don't need to be an expert, you don't need to know how to read drawings in order to be able to have meaning about how things are going and the development of the design. And that way you just get the best ideas instead of just the impression that the architect wants to get.
I get several sort of associations, but one is the Norwegian Defence Estate Agency told me once that there are two big expenses to any building that they have. It's not the cost of building it, but it's energy and cleaning. Those are the big expenses in the long term. And if you get the cleaning people early in the design process to make minor adjustments to the design itself, for it to become much more efficient to clean, you save a bundle of money. But they're not design experts. But if they can get access to and come with opinion, as you mentioned, that would be hugely beneficial for financially and also for, of course, for the usage and the longevity of the building.
Mm. We have done a similar test with we are from the inland in Norway, and there's a new hospital being planned. So we've been testing the BIM files with Vrex for that project, and what we did was bring some of the people that are going to work in the hospital in and have a look, and they are very focused on minor things that maybe an architect may not be focused on, which is the placement of the cabinet where you keep the towels, because that would you pick up 20 towels a day, and if that's in the wrong spot, you walk several kilometers extra every day. So those minor details that the workers are focused on may not be at the top of the priority for the project developers.
That's very true. Also interesting, how do you see this going forward? What's the technology development? What's the sort of potential and possibilities of software or tools in terms of what is possible with the knowledge and the level of expertise and the level of... So how do you see this going forward?
Our first and main focus is to maximize the value VR can have today, which is, and then to get to that point, we need to get the delay down from when you have a problem to when you are inside VR and discussing the problem. So we have to get to the, whenever you put on VR goggles and you have invited your teammate in to have a discussion, it should be immediately have the latest data available inside VR. That's the priority number one. And the second is to have a smooth workflow and data flow between all different platforms. So you go from a flat screen, big screen, to a laptop, to a mobile phone, to AR glasses, to mixed reality glasses, and get those working together. Because having all those, if we create silos within this technology, then that defeats the purpose. The whole point is to break down silos and work with cross-disciplinary teams.
Are you optimistic in terms of hardware development? And
I think we should expect similar development like the mobile phone. We can see it already that it's approximately at the same rate as every time a new phone comes out, new virtual reality goggles comes out. This year we got rid of those sensors that you place inside the room. In next generation or the one after that, we get rid of the cables altogether, and yeah. So I think we should expect the same rate.
How about AR? I mean, that's an exciting potential. I think it's especially on the construction side. Do we have the hardware today that we need?
The problem with AR today is that you are limited to the local hardware. So whatever you can carry on top of your head is what you have in as the power, which is basically the same as a mobile phone or maybe two. As soon as we solve the wire problems, then we can get higher data ranges. Get data capacities to AR as well. There are some solutions that could work without having that problem, where you get the streaming. You can stream things from the cloud, and you don't have to have all the data inside the goggles at some point at the same time, and that works today. But what we're talking about here, I think we need some generations more before we get. We need more data capacity.
What's your thoughts on these things, Angie?
For us, our immediate goal of where I see that the current available VR can be used is in the urban level. We feel that it's so important that city planners are aware of how a space is experienced by the user and not just in the conceptual level. we know that there is a lot of pressure to start integrating sensor data and weather data, traffic data. But we are missing out on the most important simulation, which is the human experience. So I would like to start bringing VR as an accessible tool for anyone that wants to look into it. And Norway is defined by a culture where everybody feels a responsibility towards participating in the public debate. What if we give them more tools to be part of this? So when you feel ownership of your own city, of your own spaces, we want to hear from the people that matters. Because in the end of the day, design, it's only in function of making people's lives better. So we want to hear from those ones that are actually going to use it.
Interesting. But in terms of hardware technology, have you noticed any difference and things have gotten better, or is it still in the same place, or would
Exponentially better.
Exponentially better.
Things got better for me when I met Rune, anyways. But I feel that it is important that we position ourselves early and start giving things direction. That because software is one thing, but technology and innovation comes from the uses that you give to it, not the machine itself. So we want to get involved, but we also want to get our clients involved and the users involved as early as possible to make the most successful project.
Neuralink is a company that's developing a direct access to your brain in terms of technology and interfacing. That sounds like an exciting potential for VR. I mean, you just think it and then there you are.
I've been thinking about that as well. I saw the presentation the team made on YouTube a few days or weeks ago. One of the problems with the something new as AR and VR is the input-output interfaces. Having a keyboard without any keys to touch, we have tried it and it doesn't feel right. The same thing with pointing to things without feeling when you hit it, you put your hand through the walls, everything just doesn't work. So being able to think it and having it happen, that's a good start. At the moment I think we have to use the tools available, which is the Google voice activation, and that's again a good start as well. May not be the full solution, but maybe you use voice to give an indication of what your intentions are, and then that gives you a few options based on that. I think that's a way to navigate large button sets. I don't think we will go. We have seen some VR solutions where you have 50 buttons in front of you in VR, and it's not very user friendly. So we need to figure out how to you do the I/O experience.
It's a fascinating, almost a podcast episode in itself, because when the keyboard was invented, it was changed to minimize the efficiency of the keyboard in order to avoid having this old typewriter getting clogged up. So QWERTY, the layout was invented. There you go. That's how you invent nice user interfaces. So we'll see how that goes. But are there any sort of final comments that you would like to bring in and tell our listeners? Angie?
I would say stay tuned, because it's when we all together push forward and we start actively and proactively looking for solutions instead of waiting until things are established enough for us to just take an off-the-shelf solution. We need input, we need inspiration. So whoever that is listening that works in the construction industry, get involved, try, get in touch. That's how we can move things forward faster. We need demand.
Very good points. So listeners, get in touch.
I think that's important, because the solutions won't be created by themselves, and if no one is trying it out and giving feedback on what is actually the requirements, then software engineers aren't going to invent it automatically. So trying it out and figuring out what data is needed, what's the process that's required, and yeah.
Well, that's a good final comment, I think. So thank you very much for coming. And that concludes episode number 11 of Bimcast.
Thanks for having us.